Ever tried a barrel-aged gin? If not, over the next 3 episodes, I will introduce you to 3 of my favorite gins that have made a barrel-aged version out of their iconic gins. And what better way to start than with the ingenious master distiller MacKensey and 4 pillars. Let's get to it. Hi guys, and welcome to High on Gin. Not that many people have tried barrel-aged versions of gin and seen what an amazing and quite different product it gives us. So I thought I would take 3 of my favorite gins that also make a cask version of their gin and maybe inspire you guys to try a cask version. Today we start with 4 pillars and their rare dry gin. And if you are familiar with my previous videos, you will have noticed that 4 Pillars is one of my absolute favorite distilleries in the world, and that I have love is not the right word here, I guess, but a huge respect for this guy here, Master Distiller MacKensey, and his ability to do the gin magic again and again and again. And if you haven't seen these episodes, I will link to them up here. And I really encourage you guys to check them out and check out 4 Pillars. So, since you can get the introduction to the distillery through these videos up here, I thought that we could start with a little history about the barrel-aged gin. Because this type of gin here is not a new thing. Actually, you can say that it is as old as gin itself, as gin has been stored in barrels since the beginning of gin production in around 1575. It was people like Master Distiller Alexandre Gabriel from Cognac-Ferrand that brought new focus on this type of gin. His famous Citadel gin was based on a historical recipe from 1775 from the archives of Dunkirk in France. And he discovered that the Citadel of the time was supposed to be smuggled to England in small casks due to the continuous problematic relationship between France and England. It reminded him that at the time the only real storing vessel was in a cask. That is why he decided to start aging gin and see how that would affect the gin. And the result was the Citadel Reserve Gin, released in 2008, and at the same time a couple of American gin producers had also been playing with some historic recipes and had come to the same conclusion that gin wasn't stored in bottles back in the days, but in a cask, and therefore they also launched a aged gin in 2008. So you can say 2008 was the year where this type of gin was brought to life again. And boy, am I glad that these guys did just that. Barrel-aged gin or cask gin or oak-rested gin, or well, this type of gin has many names. It often becomes this hybrid between gin and a whiskey or scotch or bourbon. This perfect sipping gin, but also the perfect gin for some great cocktails. A cask, of course, brings some woody flavors to the gin, but it often also alters how the botanicals in the original gin interacts, and it brings out new flavors depending on the barrel that is used. If it is a cognac barrel or a bourbon barrel, or in the case of 4 Pillars, a Chardonnay barrel or a sherry barrel. MacKensey and his team decided to do their first version of an aged gin around Christmas in 2013, immediately after their first gin, the rare dry gin, was released. They decided to look for an old Chardonnay barrel made of French oak. And they found the perfect barrel for this at the neighboring winery in the Yarra Valley region, where the distillery is also located. The first 2 barrels were sourced from the cellars of the award-winning winemaker Tom Carson. These barrels were filled with the 4-pillar rare dry gin at a slightly higher proof. 6 months later, in 2014, the distillery's first barrel-aged gin was ready to be released. And what a success it has become. What started as a little side project has now grown into this much bigger solera system, as I am not the only one in the world that thinks that the result is absolutely marvelous. And if you're not so familiar with the solera system, it is a system that involves rows of barrels that are stacked on top of each other. The bottommost row of the cask, which is called the solera, solera in Spanish means on the ground, that contains liquid that has been aging the longest. When it's time to bottle some of that liquid, it is taken from these bottom rows of barrels. Let's say half of the liquid is removed from these barrels. Then liquid from the barrels directly above, which are called criaderas, and contains the second oldest liquid, is used to replace what was taken from the solera. Finally, new liquid from the topmost row of the barrels, also called the second criaderas, replaces what was taken from the second row, and the top barrels is then filled with unaged spirit. And this process repeats itself over and over again. 4 Pillars has 16 Chardonnay barrels in their solera system. When it comes to the second version of the barrel-aged version here of the rare dry gin, the sherry cask gin that was released in 2018, it is matured in sherry cask from both Spain and Australia. And here they have 42 barrels in use in their solera system. When we smell the Chardonnay barrel gin, boy, you get these very, very pleasant, subtle smell of sweet lime and caramelized lemons, this sweet smell of wood, vanilla, and this fine juniper note. The taste is also very, very pleasant with the sweet notes of lime and the woodiness, but it also have a touch of zing of ginger that is elevated by the alcohol. The aftertaste is carried by the woody notes, the piney juniper, and some fine, slightly more herbaceous notes. And when we look at this one here, when you smell and taste the sherry cask version, you get many of the same qualities that you get in the Chardonnay barrel version. But in this version, 4 Pillars has also added a little bit of amontillado sherry that they add at bottling. And this gives the sherry cask gin a, well, little less citrus feel, but adds some additional notes of fruits and nuts and this very delicious tobacco sweetness. Both the Chardonnay barrel and the sherry cask gin should be tried first, neat or on the rocks, to really make the most out of the subtle flavors from the solera. If you get a bottle of the Chardonnay barrel gin, I suggest that you try to add a drop of honey and a rosemary sprig to it. And if you buy this one here, the sherry cask gin, try to make an old-fashioned cocktail. I've tried both of these recipes and they are amazing. And you can find more great recipes on 4 Pillars website. So guys, there you have it. My warmest recommendations, and I hope that you will try these versions of gin, as it gives a whole new dimension, depth, and look at these, the beautiful color to this amazing gin here that it is built upon. And let me assure you, it doesn't have the, feared and often known sharpness and alcohol burn that many of the whiskeys have. But it brings all the most subtle and sweet notes that whiskey also has. It is the best from the two worlds, the gin and the whiskey. And it is an absolute joy to sip. So stay tuned for more recommendations. Until next time.